Hello, St. Mary's. One of the things that I experience as a pastor is that as I'm putting a sermon together, there's often a lot of material that ends up kind of on the editing room floor and doesn't make it into a Sunday morning sermon. Please save your jokes about how long my sermons are. But the idea is that there's often a lot that I can't find a way in, and I was more focused on sort of giving a good word to you all than to telling somebody else's story yesterday. But as I was prepping this sermon on liturgy and scripture, I wanted to tell so badly a story of one particular Christian whose life was changed by their encounter with scripture. And I'll tell you, he's changed your life and my life as well. And so I thought this forum might be a place to go ahead and tell that story. And it is the story of Martin Luther. Many of us are familiar with Luther's story. Of course, we know that Luther was just a regular guy mostly, and the story, sort of almost the myth goes that he got caught in a rainstorm one time, and there was lightning all around and flashing, and he swore in the middle of this rainstorm that if God got him out of the storm, didn't strike him with lightning, that he would become a monk. Obviously, he survives the storm, and indeed, he enters an Augustinian monastery. But what he found there was not a closer life with God. What he found was a lot of resentment. This goes to the idea that just because we deal with God doesn't mean that we love God. And here's what he wrote in one of his letters. He wrote, "Though I lived as a monk without reproach, I felt that I was a sinner before God with an extremely disturbed conscience. I did not love. Yes, I hated the righteousness of God who punishes sinners, and secretly I was angry with God." Again, he's in a world where he's devoted his life to God, and yet he's harboring this deep anger. And so this is a remarkable story. Like, how is it that the founder of sort of what we come to know as the Protestant Reformation, how does he start it from a place of anger? Well, through his daily rhythms, through the liturgy that Luther would have to go through as a monk day by day by day, so much of his work was about interacting with and meditating upon the scriptures. And Luther was particularly bothered by one passage. And it's out of the book of Romans, chapter 3, in particular, verse 21. But it might be worth it for you to go back and read all of chapter 3 if you're interested in this story at all. But he writes this. He says, "At last, by the mercy of God, meditating day and night, I have heed to the context of the words, namely, in it the righteousness of God is revealed." As an aside, again, this is Romans chapter 3, verse 21. He said, "There I began to understand that the righteousness of God is that by which the righteous live by a gift of God, namely by faith. Here I felt that I was altogether born again and had entered into paradise itself through open gates. And I extolled my sweetest word with a love as great as the hatred with which I had beforehand handed the word righteousness of God." This is an incredible story. Luther enters the monastery out of obligation in a burdened state. He hated God, but it was this idea, the righteousness of God, as he meditated upon it day and night, as he chewed upon it, as he listened so very carefully, trying to figure this out, this really difficult notion. And what he discovered is that the righteousness of God is not the law. It is not this burden that weighs us down and shows us how terrible it is. The righteousness of God is the gift of God that lives inside of us. And once that opened to him, Luther's world changed forever. And by the way, so did the entire Western world, because the Protestant Reformation is the most important movement in the last 500 years of the church. And he said that his heart moved from anger to love, and it was through meditation on the scriptures. And the world was changed. And friends, this story is such a powerful illustration about how liturgy and careful listening to the scriptures can create a new reality in your heart and in mine. And it created a new reality for the world, to the point where even those Christian communities that have rejected Luther's understanding have kind of come along in the last 100 years or so and said, actually, you know what? Luther was right about that. The righteousness of God is a gift. It is not an obligation. It is not a burden. It is not a law. It is a gift given to every one of us. And that is indeed why we sit in a Protestant church, because we learned to love God through meditation on the scriptures. And so I challenge you, as you go through your week, as you pray through our prayer list, as you engage with the church on a variety of levels, we invite you to dive into the scriptures. And if you need a place to start with your favorite story. Google it up, figure out where it is, start with your favorite story. And if you don't have one, I invite you to go to the Gospel of John. I've always found John to be really powerful. And we referenced yesterday some of the first ideas are the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. I invite you to start there and have a conversation about what you're reading. And in that, may our heart be freed from fear, freed from burden, freed from sort of the heaviness of obligation that we are not what we should be. May we engage with the love of God once more through the life-changing word of the scriptures. I pray that you would know that this week in however you engage the scriptures. Peace and good, y'all.